Hello, my name is Naquita Coates, and I am presenting my older adult interview presentation. Alright, so I interviewed one of my community members about her life growing up in the same town that I grew up in, just many years apart. And I'm excited to tell you a little bit about her and how her growth and development overlaps with a lot of what we've been learning in this course, specifically the Erikson and Piaget theories of development. So without further ado, we'll get started. So Miss Jane was born in Calvert County, Maryland. It's a rural county in southern Maryland. Back in the day, it was really popular for tobacco farming and things like that. And her parents actually farmed, and it's very cool that that's a thing because my family farmed as well. So I wonder if there was any overlap in that. But anyway, they farmed and they weren't making a lot of money farming, of course, and they had 10 children to raise, a lot of time in the field and then also taking care of a home. It was very, very busy time for them. Jane has 9 other siblings and she happened to be right smack dab in the middle. And now what she does is she knits and she sells mittens and gloves at the local farmers markets, usually on the weekends. And if you ever want to meet Jane, just stop by and see her. She makes great stuff. So some key events in Jane's life were the loss of her younger brother Samuel. Jane and him were very close, and I'll go into further detail about their relationship a little later in the presentation. She was also kicked out of school, and it wasn't for her being mischievous or doing things bad, really. It was just more so, the school was like, all right, go home. And again, I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we go throughout these slides. And then another major event, and one that I could arguably say was very prominent in her current livelihood, one that still, you see the effects of now, was when she moved in with her grandmother, who she really speaks about in the highest regard, and it's amazing to hear all the wonderful things she has to say about her. So, the first major event happened when Jane was fairly young. She was about around the age of 8. She said that Samuel was 2 years younger than her, and when he passed, he was 6, so I'm assuming she was 8. Um, and like I was saying previously, her parents worked on a farm, and they didn't have, the time and energy, to manage all 10 of their kids, though they tried. So basically, Jane took on a kind of maternal role with her brother Samuel. Though he was only 2 years younger, she helped him with his schoolwork. She made sure he was eating, made sure the other siblings were treating him fairly. They were very, very close. This was arguably her best friend at the time. And their house caught on fire just a little after Jane's birthday. And she remembered it so vividly, because she was talking about how enjoyable her party was, and then for something so tragic to happen so shortly after. But pretty much, Samuel was in the house, and everyone had run out, and then because of the smoke, he ended up suffocating in an effort to save their dog. And this was very tremendous for Jane. The second event was when she was kicked out of school. She really loved school. Education was very important to her. She did a lot of reading and, she really enjoyed school. So after Sam had died, she stopped participating in school. She didn't speak to anyone. She didn't speak to her teachers, her classmates, her other siblings. Like, she stopped talking to everyone around her. And because she wasn't speaking at all, the school assumed that she was mute and that she couldn't continue there and they wouldn't be able to teach her because they weren't qualified to. Sorry about that. So, one of the things that concerned me about Jane not being able to finish her schooling was when I was doing my research on a study done by a researcher named Malone. In the study, it was found that poor cognitive abilities have negative effects on older adults' um, developing mind, or their aging mind rather. And in my time talking with Jane, she didn't show any signs of cognitive failure or anything like that. She was able to tell her story, tell a few jokes. It was very fluent. Um, but another thing the study did point out was that older adults who do have cognitive issues is usually more so related to depression. And I do fear that it's possible that Jane could have some form of depression. But again, I'm not a licensed psychologist, so I'm not going to diagnose her. It's just from her story, it's a strong possibility. So the next part of Jane's story was when she went to go live at her grandmother's house. Her parents couldn't take care of her because they thought that she was mute as well because she wasn't talking to them. So they sent her to go live with her grandmother, who lived closer to the shops and markets. And because she lived so close to the shops and markets, Jane had a lot more access to young boys, and the young boys liked her because she was young and attractive, as she felt the need to say time and time again. And because her grandmother was older, she didn't really supervise Jane very closely, so she had a lot of freedom to just go out and do what she wanted. But also at her grandmother's house is where Jane learned to sew and knit, which is what she still does in her life now. Another of the studies that I researched came to mind when Jane was speaking about her grandmother's house. When she talked about her grandmother or being in her home, she was far more flamboyant. She was far more excited. Like, her whole demeanor had changed. A study done in 2011 with women who came from different countries to live in the U.S. It was found that the women's narrative adjusted to fit their own self-perception in their new place. And it was very interesting because Jane's narration did change because she moved from her house full of children and minimal parental interaction to a house where she still had little interaction, but she was more in solitude, and she spoke so much more. The stages that stood out to me were industry versus inferiority, ego, identity versus role confusion, intimacy versus isolation. In the industry inferiority stage, it's seen as a time to develop friendships and feel accomplished for doing the right thing. But however, at this young age, Jane had already become antisocial because she had a strong fear that becoming attached to other people meant that when they do go on, or die rather, that it'll be so painful for her. So instead of having to relive losing the feeling that she felt losing her brother, she just decided to avoid everything and not get involved with anyone, make new friends, or keep her old friends. During the ego, identity and role confusion stage, Jane was, by theory, is supposed to be finding herself and where she fits in the world. However, this is around the time when she had moved into her grandmother's. She found herself a boyfriend who was into a lot of bad things, like stealing from the markets and shops. And Jane liked that. She liked having fun with him. And because she had already detached herself from everyone else, she didn't feel the need for social acceptance. She didn't feel like she had to do the right thing, because if she felt good doing it, it didn't matter what anyone else thought about it, you know? And the way that she summed up this time in her life is by saying, I became a woman, and that's that. She had decided that this is who she was, and she was happy just being a woman. The intimacy and isolation stage, for Jane, it kind of leans more to the isolation end. For she didn't really feel a connection with her boyfriend. She married him, yes, but what she wanted was a marriage that was just that. Like, we're just married on paper. We don't have to do anything special. But in addition to that, there was little intimacy because they had a very physical relationship that was violent at times. And it wasn't just her boyfriend being violent to her, but her also being violent to him. But in that time, she was able to build a home with this man, and there were times when they were happy together. The Piaget stages that stood out the most to me were the pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational stages. In the pre-operational stage, I actually feel that Jane regressed back to the pre-operational stage because Piaget separated his stages by age, and when she was going through the loss of her brother, she was a little over the age of 7. So she kind of went back to this egocentric mindset because the loss was so painful for her. She thought that fire would always mean death, and she learned that if she doesn't get attached, she can't feel sad. And this is also the time when she decided to become antisocial immediately following that loss. And the concrete operational stage, Jane was removed from school, so she didn't really have those relationships anymore, nor did she want them. But she knew what emotions were and how they were tied to relationships, which is why she understood, how she felt about not wanting to be close to her family and other people. And she also learned how to sew and knit, which is one of the motor developments that happens during this stage, according to Piaget. In the formal operational stage for Jane, this is when the adolescent mischievousness comes in. But the thing was, Jane was already doing that way before she was an adolescent. So, again, appearance, the way that people saw her, socially, physically, didn't matter to her. She knew she was beautiful, and she felt that doing these things made her a woman, and she was happy with that. She did a lot of stealing with her boyfriend, usually just small things. She broke the rules that her grandmother did set because, again, her grandmother was not really supervising her. And she also developed this idea of having a marriage without love. So, in the concrete operational stage, she had decided that she could build a homeless person that she didn't really like, but, they had a good time together. But then she realized, that their connection was not love based. A study by a researcher, Cramp, done in 2014, said that during adolescence, teenagers will go through psychosocial mortuarium, where they're testing out different things and seeing if they like what they're doing. Jane experienced this a little bit before she was an adolescent, but even more so once she had made the decision to keep this boyfriend. And what Cramp was arguing is that nowadays teens don't feel the need to do this any longer because movies, like the cinemas, push us to get our lives together fast and not have this time for fun and everything else. However, I feel that Jane was at the same point, not focused on testing out things and seeing how she liked it. She was more so like, I'm just going to do this. It's whatever. And it really shows a lot because in this same study, their reasoning behind movies being so influential was that they took symbols and religion and turned them into horror or jokes or something like that. And Jane, throughout our entire conversation, never once brought up a single symbol or religion or anything else like that. And it shows that it's not just movies that are taking away this symbolism, but it can also be based on experience as well. I believe that Jane proved that she wasn't the typical adolescent. A study done in 2012 found that adolescents were more so focused on finding themselves instead of being concerned about their future. And Jane showed that it really wasn't about either of those things for her. It was just avoiding grief and sadness. Thanks for listening.